Time, that ever-flowing stream of our lives, often leaves us feeling as though we are at the mercy of its relentless passage. We are sometimes made to believe that the years we have spent in vain pursuits, failures, or waiting are gone, irretrievable and irreparable. But this is a misunderstanding of both the nature of time and the nature of the one who created it. Consider for a moment how we measure time. We place great value on the years of youth, the vigor of the present moment, and the achievements that accompany them. Yet we often fail to appreciate that our Creator sees time from a perspective far beyond our human grasp. God does not see our years in the same way that we do. Where we see wasted moments, He sees opportunities for renewal, for growth, and for a deeper understanding of His will. The concept of restoration in God's hands is not the mere return of lost things, it is the transformation of what has been into something far greater than we could have imagined. The years you feel were lost, whether in failure, sorrow, or missed opportunities, are not beyond repair. In God's time, even the brokenness of our past can be used as the soil from which new hope and purpose grow. What you have lost, He will restore not in the same form it once was, but in a form far more meaningful. One might ask, how can this restoration come? When will I see it and hear? I must remind you of the nature of God's work. Restoration does not always come when we expect it. We are creatures bound by the ticking of the clock, but God is not confined to such limits. His restoration works in ways that often transcend the shortness of our understanding. It requires patience and trust, qualities that can only be cultivated through unwavering faith. You must believe that, though your restoration may not come today, it will come when God's plan reaches its fullness. The process of restoration is not always easy. There are moments when you might question whether it will ever happen, whether the time you feel has been wasted can truly be redeemed. But here lies the power of faith in trusting that God is never idle, even when we feel that we are. Just as the seed must first fall into the ground and seemingly disappear before it can sprout anew, so too must we surrender our doubts and anxieties to Him, trusting that He is at work in ways we cannot always perceive. I encourage you today to look upon your past not as a series of wasted years, but as the raw material for something new. Whatever you have suffered, whatever time you have felt was lost, will be restored to you in ways that will not only heal you, but will make you stronger, wiser, and more equipped for the purpose He has set for your life. Do not give in to despair. Do not believe the lie that the best days are behind you. Trust, instead, in the promise that the years you feel have been taken will be returned to you not in the way you might expect, but in a manner far more glorious than you could ever imagine. In the hands of God, nothing is wasted. He will restore all the years you thought were lost. Restoration is a concept that, when considered from a human perspective, often carries the idea of returning something to its original state. We may imagine the restoration of an old building, where the goal is to bring it back to its former glory, preserving every detail as it was in its prime. But the restoration God offers is much deeper and far more transformative than simply returning something to the way it was. It is not about fixing things to a previous state, it is about making them whole in a way that surpasses what they were before. When we look at our own lives and the time we believe we have lost, the idea of restoration can seem almost impossible. We might think of years spent in failure, regret, or disappointment, and wonder if those years can truly be redeemed. After all, how can you restore time that has already passed? How can lost years be made meaningful again? The answer lies in understanding the nature of God's restoration. God does not merely turn back the clock, he transforms what has been into something of greater purpose and value. The years that seem to be lost in fruitless endeavors are not wasted in the eyes of the Creator. Instead, they are used to shape us, refine us, and prepare us for a deeper understanding of His plan. In the Bible, the concept of restoration is closely tied to God's promise of renewal. In the Old Testament, we read about the restoration of Israel after their exile. For decades, the people of Israel had been dispersed, suffering, and living in conditions far from the life they had known in their homeland. Many of them likely felt that their best years were behind them, that their hopes for the future were shattered. But God, in His infinite wisdom and mercy, promised to restore them not just to their previous state, but to a better state. He did not simply return them to their former land, He led them into a new era, one filled with a deeper understanding of His presence and a renewed commitment to their purpose as a people. This restoration was not just a physical return, it was a spiritual and emotional healing that transformed their entire outlook on life. God's ability to restore is not limited to the physical realm. He is concerned with our inner being, our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. When we feel that time has been wasted, it is often because we focus on the external markers of success or progress, our career, our achievements, or our status in society. We think of time only in terms of measurable accomplishments. But God sees time differently. He looks at the heart and the journey. He understands that growth often happens in the quiet, unseen moments, the times of struggle, of waiting, and of pain. These moments, which might appear to be wasted or unproductive in the eyes of the world, are in fact laying the groundwork for something far greater. In God's hands, these experiences become part of His restoration process. One of the most profound aspects of God's restoration is that it takes into account the totality of our experiences, even the painful ones. Human restoration often seeks to cover up or forget painful memories, but God's restoration is one that fully acknowledges our struggles and losses. He does not erase them. Instead, He redeems them. This means that the pain we have experienced is not for nothing. It will not be forgotten or dismissed. Rather, it will be transformed into something that serves a higher purpose. God can take the most difficult periods of our lives and use them to teach us lessons, build our character, and prepare us for a future that we could not have imagined. Through this process, our past suffering becomes a wellspring of wisdom and strength, giving us the ability to empathize with others, to grow in patience, and to understand the deeper meaning of life's challenges. God's restoration is not limited by time as we understand it. While we may feel that we are too old, too late, or too far gone for restoration to take place, God's timing is never hindered by the constraints we experience. His restoration is not bound by human clocks or calendars. He works outside of time, bringing about healing and growth at the right moment, often in ways we cannot predict or control. This means that even if we feel that certain years of our lives have been wasted, God can still bring about a profound transformation. The years that seemed like lost time are still part of His grand design, and He can use them to propel us forward in ways that we might not yet understand. The concept of restoration in God's hands is also one of abundance. In His kingdom, nothing is ever wasted. When He restores, He does so in a way that multiplies the value of what was lost. This is not the restoration of merely what we had before, but of something richer, fuller, and more meaningful. It is akin to the parable of the talents, where the faithful servant's small investment is multiplied into a great return. In the same way, when God restores the years we think are lost, He does so with an abundance that far exceeds what we could have hoped for or imagined. This is a reminder that God's ways are not our ways, and His plans are always for our ultimate good, even when we cannot yet see how they will unfold. The restoration God offers is one of deep spiritual renewal. It is about returning to Him and finding our true purpose in His will. When we trust in His ability to restore, we are not simply looking for a return to the past, we are looking for a future that is aligned with His divine plan for us. Restoration, in this sense, is not just about returning to what we once knew, but about moving forward into something even better. Time, in its essence, is an abstract concept that humans often struggle to fully comprehend. We measure time in seconds, minutes, hours, and years, marking the passage of life through the lens of these numbers. To us, time seems fixed and linear, always moving forward, never turning back. This linearity gives us a sense of urgency, pushing us to accomplish more, be more, and live faster. We are constantly aware of how much time we have left, how much time we've wasted, and how much more we must do before time runs out. Yet, when we look at time from a divine perspective, we begin to understand that God operates outside of this human construct. His relationship with time is not limited by clocks and calendars, and He sees time not as a chain of sequential moments, but as a canvas on which He paints the entirety of human experience. One of the key challenges we face when it comes to understanding restoration is our limited view of time. We live in a world that measures everything in terms of efficiency and speed. Success is often defined by how quickly we reach our goals, how much we can accomplish in a short span, and how rapidly we can make progress. In this world, time is a scarce commodity that constantly slips through our fingers. When we perceive time in this way, it becomes easy to believe that our past failures, mistakes, or missed opportunities are permanent, that they cannot be restored because the clock has already moved too far ahead. Yet when we look to God, we realize that time is not a barrier to restoration, it is merely a tool that He uses to unfold His plan for us in a way that we cannot always grasp. God is not bound by time in the way that we are. To us, time is a one-way street, always moving in one direction, never pausing, never reversing. But God exists beyond the boundaries of time. He created it, and He holds it in His hands. The Bible speaks of God as eternal, without beginning or end, existing outside of the time constraints that define human existence. This is why the concept of restoration from God's perspective is not restricted by the ticking of a clock. While we may look at our past and feel that we have lost valuable time, God sees those years differently. He is not bound by the past, present, or future. He is the God of all time, working in all time simultaneously. This means that what we see as wasted time is not lost to God. He can work in our lives at any moment, restoring what was lost, no matter when it happened. God's timing is different from ours, in the sense that He does not operate according to our sense of urgency. We often feel that we are running out of time, that our window of opportunity is closing, and that if we don't act quickly, we'll miss our chance. This anxiety about time can cloud our judgment and lead us to make decisions based on fear rather than faith. But God's sense of timing is perfect. He does not rush us or force us to move faster than we are ready. He knows exactly when the right moment will arrive for our restoration to take place. Sometimes the waiting process is part of the restoration itself. It is in the waiting that our faith is tested, our patience is developed, and our trust in His timing is strengthened. We may not understand why things are taking so long, but we can rest assured that God's timing is always right. God's relationship with time allows for the possibility of profound transformation. We often think of time as a force that works against us, slowly wearing us down and erasing our potential. But as we age, we feel the loss of youth and vitality, and as we experience setbacks, we feel the erosion of our dreams. But God can redeem even the most seemingly irreversible loss of time. He can take the years that seem lost and transform them into something meaningful. This is not to say that God will always give us back exactly what we lost. In fact, the restoration He offers may look very different from what we expected. The years spent in struggle, disappointment, or failure may not be returned to us in the same form, but God can take those years and use them to build a future that is far better than we ever imagined. Through His grace, we are not bound by the limitations that time places on us. Rather, we are free to receive His restoration in ways that transcend the passage of time. When we surrender our understanding of time to God, we begin to realize that our impatience and anxiety about the future are rooted in a misunderstanding of His divine plan. We often believe that if we don't act now, we'll lose our chance. But God operates in a way that is not constrained by our timelines. While we may feel that we are running out of time, God is already working in the background, preparing the perfect moment for our restoration. The years we spend waiting, wondering and yearning for something better are not wasted in His eyes. Instead, they are part of the process that leads us to a deeper understanding of His love, His purpose for our lives, and the restoration He has in store for us. The key to understanding God's restoration lies in recognizing that He is not limited by time. Our anxieties about missed opportunities, wasted years, or past mistakes are rooted in our limited view of time. But when we trust in God's perfect timing, we can find peace in knowing that He is always at work, bringing about restoration in ways that are beyond our comprehension. In God's hands, time is not a threat but a tool for transformation, and we can rest assured that no matter what we've lost, He will restore it in His perfect time. Faith in the process of restoration is a crucial aspect of understanding how God works in our lives, especially when it comes to the restoration of what seems to be lost time. It is easy to become disheartened or impatient when we are in the midst of difficulty, feeling as though we are waiting for something to change or improve. We live in a world where instant results are often expected, and waiting for restoration can feel like a long, drawn-out process that tests our resolve. Yet faith in the process is essential to understanding how God's timing operates and how He is working behind the scenes, even when we cannot see the immediate results. This faith is not passive, it is an active trust that acknowledges that God is doing something even when nothing seems to be happening. One of the key aspects of this faith is recognizing that restoration is often a gradual process rather than an instant transformation. In our fast-paced world, we are conditioned to expect quick fixes, whether it's through technology, social media, or even in the way we seek personal success. When things are not fixed immediately, we can begin to doubt the process, questioning whether change will ever come or if God is even listening. However, God's restoration process works in His time, not ours, and that time is not always aligned with our human expectations. The fact that we cannot immediately see the results of God's work does not mean that He is not at work. Faith is trusting that God is moving in the background, working in ways that we cannot yet comprehend. Just because the process is slow does not mean that it is ineffective. In fact, slow restoration often leads to deeper, more lasting change. It allows for growth and reflection in ways that quick fixes do not. The waiting process, when viewed through the lens of faith, is not wasted time. It is an essential part of the restoration journey. Just as a tree does not grow overnight, but must first develop strong roots before it can reach its full potential, so too must we trust that God is building a foundation within us during the waiting period. This is a time for internal growth, for strengthening our character, and for preparing us to receive the restoration that God has in store. Without this waiting period, we would not be ready to handle the full extent of what God has planned for us. Faith teaches us that the waiting is not empty. It is in this space that we learn to depend on God, to trust in His plan, and to develop the patience required to experience true restoration. Another important aspect of faith in the process is surrender. We often feel as though we must control every aspect of our lives, that we must ensure that everything unfolds according to our desires and timelines. This need for control can make waiting for restoration particularly difficult, as we struggle to understand why God's plan is taking longer than we think it should. But faith requires surrender to let go of our need for control and to trust that God is guiding us in the right direction. Surrendering to God's process does not mean that we passively wait for things to happen. Instead, it means acknowledging that His wisdom far exceeds ours and that His plan is better than anything we could have orchestrated ourselves. Surrendering our will allows us to fully submit to the restorative work that God is doing within us, even if it takes longer than we anticipate. Faith in the process also involves accepting the unpredictability of God's timing. We often have a specific idea of when we think restoration should occur, but God's timing does not always align with our expectations. We may expect to see a breakthrough at a particular moment, only to find that God is working behind the scenes in ways we cannot see. This unpredictability can be unsettling, especially when we feel that we have waited long enough or that we deserve restoration sooner. However, it is in these moments that our faith is tested and strengthened. We learn to trust God not because we see the end result immediately, but because we believe in His character and His promises. The process of restoration, though often long and uncertain, teaches us to rely on God's faithfulness rather than our own understanding. An essential element of faith in the process is recognizing that restoration is often accompanied by personal transformation. The journey to restoration is not just about receiving back what was lost, but also about becoming a different person through the process. As God works in our lives, He is not merely fixing external circumstances, He is shaping us internally. This transformation is necessary for the full experience of restoration. Without it, we might find ourselves returning to the same patterns or mistakes that led to our loss in the first place. The restoration process, therefore, is as much about internal change as it is about external restoration. Faith helps us see this deeper purpose, allowing us to embrace the transformation that is taking place within us, even when we do not yet see the outward signs of restoration. The restoration process is also an act of divine partnership. While we may be waiting for God to act, we are not passive participants in the process. Our role is to cooperate with God, to remain faithful, and to align our actions with His will. This might involve repentance, healing from past wounds, or learning new lessons along the way. It is important to remember that restoration is not simply about receiving, it is also about being transformed into a vessel that can receive and fully appreciate what God has in store. Faith in the process calls us to actively participate in our own restoration, trusting that our efforts to align ourselves with God's will are not in vain. It requires a willingness to cooperate with God, even when we do not understand how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Faith in the process is rooted in the confidence that God's plans for us are always good. Even when the process is difficult, when we feel discouraged, or when it seems like restoration is far off, faith assures us that God is always working for our good. The waiting and the challenges are not signs of God's absence or indifference, but evidence of His deep commitment to our well-being. Restoration is a part of God's love for us, and we can trust that His plan will unfold in the best possible way for our lives.